All right, everyone. Welcome. Hi, I'm Dennis Steigerwalt. I'm the president of the Housing Innovation Alliance, and you're joining our Coffee Talk series. Today's topic is opportunities for industrialized construction and production housing. But before we get to the main event, I want to give you a little bit more information about our organization. Okay, next slide, page.
Sorry, I did. Not
So
sure.
at the Housing Innovation Alliance, we're a nationwide community of game changers. We'll figure out the technical piece while I go through this. So we're a nationwide community of game changers powering the future of home delivery. We're committed to helping production builders build better by identifying, prioritizing, and shining a light on innovation in the marketplace. We hold up these ideas, then challenge our community to improve on them in an effort to continuously raise the tide for all of us. In doing so, we like to look through three different lenses. We look at the future of home delivery through the business of building, consumer experience and relationships, and the people, process, and technology behind home delivery. You'll notice that every conversation we have within our community, whether live or virtual, takes place with one of these three focus areas. Of course, every topic touches each of these in some way, but we like to add an emphasis on one of them. Today's conversation is going to be more focused on the home delivery side of our view. So now more than ever, it's important we band together to drive change and become better businesses. Excuse me. Thank you to our partners for making our programming possible. Their leadership goes a long way towards moving the industry forward. So that, and I'm also getting a little bit of a kickback on the internet, so sorry for the lag, guys. And so getting back to today's conversation, we're going to unpack 4 key reports created to help advance the construction industry. And today we have a team of international rock stars behind these reports. So I'll get into introducing each of them, and then I'd like to hand it over to our facilitator, Ivan, to take reins. So first, I want to introduce you to Ivan Rupnik. Ivan is an architect, scholar, consultant, and associate professor of architecture at Northeastern University. Last year, Ivan co-founded ModX, a platform for international exchanges related to the volumetric modular industry. Ivan's doctoral work at Harvard University focused on the development and design of project management tools, as well as regulatory frameworks specific to off-site construction. Also with us is Ryan. Ryan is a director of the School of Design and Construction and a professor of architecture at Washington State University. His research is in the domain of off-site, modular, and industrialized construction and integrated practice. He is also a founding partner of ModX to lead knowledge management and knowledge transfer in off-site construction. Thanks for joining us, Ryan.
Thank
we
you.
also have Donna from Dodge Data and Analytics. Donna is the Industry Insights Research Director at Dodge Data and Analytics. In that role, she provides editorial direction to the Smart Market Report series. These industry reports feature market research on critical trends that are impacting the construction industry. Welcome, Donna.
Thanks, Dennis.
And joining us from Zurich, we have Jan with McKinsey. Jan is a partner at the McKinsey Global Institute, McKinsey's business and economics research arm. In addition to in-depth analysis of more than 10 countries and a series of reports on Europe, he has led global efforts on infrastructure and how gaps can be bridged, solving affordable housing challenges, and reinventing the construction industry. Thanks for joining us today, Jan. And last but not least, we have Tom Hardiman. Tom has been the executive director for the Modular Building Institute since January 2004. In that role, he oversees the governance and compliance of the association and implements the organization's strategic initiatives. Thanks for joining us, Tom.
Thank you, Dennis.
Okay. All right. So before we get into the conversation that Ivan's going to facilitate, I just want to talk quickly about how this interactive conversation is going to work. So Ivan is going to talk through each of the reports that our panelists have been responsible for developing, and then Paige and I will be monitoring the Q&A and the chat boxes within the Zoom platform here. So as questions come up, please post them, and after we have a chance to talk to each of the panelists, Paige and I will bring those questions to their attention so we can have further dialogue. In the event we're not able to get to your question during today's discussion, we will log that question and circulate it with the expert panel to ensure that it gets answered later on. So with that, it's all yours, Ivan.
Great, thanks, Dennis. Am I getting control of the slides? Oh, great. Well, Great, I got control. Dennis and I are having a very interesting conversation on another chat very recently and realized that despite of the availability of many of these reports, no one had really done a thorough job of looking at them as a kind of set, as a kind of library. So we decided that it'd be a really good opportunity, both for the Housing Innovation Alliance, but also for the broader built environment community, to start to understand these really as a kind of body of work. Okay, great. So anyway, so as you can see on this, I think we can all see on the screen now, there's been a series of really important reports that we all felt were really valuable for the industry, starting again with the report that we all have been referencing, the 2017 Reinventing Construction report that McKinsey Global Institute that prepared, Jan was involved with, that came out and really changed the conversation. So for Ryan and myself, for many of us, in talking with the construction industry, but also talking out of the construction industries, with Silicon Valley, with the public sector, this report really, all credit to McKinsey, really changed the conversation, really standardized some of the data that was being discussed, the terminology was being discussed, really created a platform and really changed the conversation. In 2018, we were lucky enough to, with the support of Tom Hardiman and MBI, Ryan Smith and I were lucky enough to be able to prepare a pretty thorough report on the volumetric modular industry. And that was the 5 and 5 modular initiative we'll discuss. And in 2019, again, McKinsey came back with a second report, modular construction from projects to products. We were again flattered to be cited in that report, Ryan and myself, and as were many others who were working in this field. And then most recently, Dodge, again, in their continued process of informing the industry, prepared the 2020 prefabrication and modular construction report. And we're again kind enough to involve some of us in that discussion. And again, those 4 reports really, we feel like something that, if you're in the construction industry, not to mention interested in offsite, this is really valuable, free information. But not only is valuable in terms of knowledge, but also it's valuable in terms of creating a common language within which we discuss these issues. Really just starting to define that. And we can all talk about this today, but really the situation before 2017 and today is quite different, simply because no matter where you're coming from, we can now at least find a common language within which to discuss these issues. So what I'm going to do today, and maybe we can keep this slide up. I think it actually works fine, all things considered. We're just going to keep the slide up as it is. I'm going to actually ask this amazing group of folks who are directly responsible for the production of these things. Really 4 very simple topics. And we're going to start with Jan, but just to introduce the topics. We're going to talk about the context from which the reports came. So what was the major initiative? We're going to talk briefly about the content, just what generally is covered in the report. And we're going to talk about impact. Since all of these are now have been around for a while, I'm going to want to know a little bit about what the authors feel has been the impact of these reports. And then finally, we're going to talk about briefly about what we think based on these reports, what's the future of offsite construction. So I'm going to start with Jan first from McKinsey Global Institute. I'm going to ask you, Jan, again, starting with let's take the 2017 report on first. What was the context behind which, what initiated McKinsey's interest in offsite construction in 2017?
Yeah, thanks. So actually, we almost came at it from the observation that there's globally these glaring infrastructure gaps that policymakers and others are struggling to fill, and most have approached the issue by trying to find private finance to get into that, and not working because it's not the real issue. And the bigger issue, there are several issues, but a bigger issue was certainly all the inefficiency around planning, engineering, but then also delivery of the infrastructure. So that together with an observation by us working, of course, across many different industries, and a bit of an observation that construction is not really at par with some other industries in its setup, in its efficiency, and its productivity. we felt that it's important to lay a bit of a foundation, understand where does construction really stand in terms of how productive it is, but of course, more importantly, get an idea of what can be done. And that is essentially then also the content of this report. So on the one hand, we are finding that construction is growing or has been growing its productivity only at about a third the rate of the average economy. So not exactly a stunning performance. But we are also then laying out 7 levers or areas of action that could close the gap and collectively add 60% to labor productivity in construction. And I think that's the, in terms of what happened then with that report, as you're then also asking about the impact. What we have seen is that it's been really a bit of a wake-up call for the industry. So a lot of people are playing that back to us, that they felt that was a bit of a wake-up call for the industry that allowed a little bit more robust discussion about change than maybe before. And I personally feel that very, very clearly firsthand that when I spoke to the report's findings shortly before it came out, I spoke to many CEOs, wanted to get their reactions, see what they think. The reaction back then was much one of, well, you know, you're kind of right. We see all those opportunities. It's probably all there. But listen, this is how this industry works and will continue to work for the next century. And that mindset has now dramatically shifted over the last 2-3 years. When I go back to the very same CEOs now, the mindset is one of, okay, we got it. This industry is changing now around us. What do we need to do so that someone else is not going to eat our cake? So it's a dramatic shift in the conversation.
Right, and it's again, I'm sure you had this experience. Yeah, and I think we've noted that as well, and that's a lot of the content in the report, because it puts the construction industry dialogue with other industries that we don't often discuss in relation, like manufacturing, but also retail. It really allows for a kind of interdisciplinary view of construction, which for whatever reason hadn't been the case in the past. Then maybe just following up then, because you were also involved in the second report in 2019. What was now that, so you as you described, there was a change in attitude, and construction was taken more seriously, both within and without, and outside of the kind of traditional construction industry. What changed with the 2019 report? What was changed in the contents and the content, and again also the impact?
Yeah, so the focus of our 2017 report was mostly on those 7 levers, like how can we change regulation, the contracting and tendering setup, value engineering and design, lean on site, and so on, and also of course use more technology in terms of BIM and robots and all those things. So things that you can do on a traditional site, if you will. And we did a lot of client work then in the years after, also helping companies do some of this. The 2019 report on modular construction was then really diving deep a little bit more into thinking like, great that you can do all those things on how you make construction sites more efficient, but why in the world should there even be construction sites? I haven't heard of, I don't know, someone coming with 20 engineers and workers to my garage to build a car for me. It's not the way it's working. And it's also not what's working for aircraft and so on. So why wouldn't it look differently? And of course, most people on this video or call now have made other approaches happen. So we wanted to dive into that and lay out the case for how it could look differently to a broader audience. But at the same time, also understand what is holding it back. Why does it have only a typically low single-digit percentage point market share in construction? And how can we overcome this dynamic? And What is interesting to see, I would say, is that this report has resonated quite a bit with investor types. So both investors who want to invest in new companies, but also who want to invest in real estate and make higher returns than they have previously done. And it has also resonated actually quite a lot with big firms who were not necessarily previously that much exposed to construction, but felt like, okay, maybe we should change that. Maybe there's an opportunity here to come at the industry from the sidelines and make the change happen that seems to be difficult to make from within.
Great. So I think that gives us a good sense of those two reports. And again, there's a lot more to dive into, and then hopefully we can get into that with the discussion. So moving on to the 5 and 5 modular report, I'm going to first ask Tom Hardiman, who was really the client for myself and for Ryan in setting up. So maybe give us a little bit of background, and I'll move to Ryan to talk a little bit about what we did in terms of the content and maybe even the goals. So Tom, what led to the 5 and 5 Modular Growth Initiative report? How did it start from MBI's point of view?
Thank you, Ivan. It really dovetails nicely with what Jan had just mentioned. We've been working with Ivan and Ryan for, gosh, going on 10 years now, I think, and we continue to have these dialogues about why does modular construction seem to be more accepted and more widely adopted in other parts of the world than it is here? Why are we only about 3%? And about that time, our board of directors said, well, let's try to pin this down. Let's engage Ivan and Ryan and find out why exactly modular construction, volumetric construction is doing better in other parts of the world. What are the similarities? What are the differences that we can look at here? And what can we learn? What can we implement from this research so that we can grow our market share? And the 5 and 5 was essentially the notion that we wanted to grow from what we thought was about 3%, turned out to be, I think, 2.4% at the time, to 5% of new construction starts within a 5-year period, basically doubling the market share. And that 5-year window just recently ended. So we've had steady growth over those 5 years, and we'll get a little bit more into the results and the findings of the paper, I'm sure, with Ryan. But that was the impetus of the hiring Ivan and Ryan to start to do this research for us.
Ryan, maybe talking a little bit about how the process went with MBI, but also what some of the basic content and findings were.
Thanks, Ivan, and thank you, Tom. To be clear, the 5 and 5 initiative report was a research effort within a larger initiative that MBI was under with their members and their board to try and grow that the industry. And what I would say is that this was very much a partnership with Tom and the board and MBI as a whole to try and identify how to move forward. So kudos to them for identifying that, we need to grow our industry, and this is one way to do it. At a high level, it consisted of 3 major methods. One was to conduct a survey, 23,000 AEC professionals in North America. We collected those from the professional rosters in states for registered professionals, design professionals, as well as general contractors. So we were trying to do traditional builders and designers and ask them what they thought of the offsite and modular in particular. And then we ran a SWOT analysis with some key leaders in the manufacturer side, the modular manufacturer side, and tried to find an overlap of what does the industry say we're missing, and what do the manufacturers say that they can own up to as things that they could do to improve and gain more market share. Second method was Ivan and I and partners toured the world and found best practices internationally and asked the question, not necessarily technically what are you doing, but what are the contextual parameters? What have you done in your country from a social, regulatory, economic, and political framework to give rise to an increased propensity of use of volumetric modular construction. And then we traveled domestically as well in the United States to some key leading companies and asked similar questions. And that all led to a roadmap that we then posted to the board, to MBI, and said, here's a roadmap to make decisions by. And that was 4 key, what we call pillars or concepts that we think any context needs to follow in order to be successful in adopting, in particular, new methods of and innovative methods of construction. And that is the development and codification of data within an industry, to call it an industry. And data is really key. We need to start collecting data. We need to start analyzing data as an industry in order to improve. The second item, in addition to data, was partnerships, and key partnerships across industries related to the offsite sector. The third was standards and standards development. And the fourth was the competence, capacity, and capability of the manufacturers themselves to upscale and upskill to deliver some of these projects that maybe they weren't able to before. So those are the key outcomes, and Tom and group can, if you'd like to, can talk about how they've responded, which they've done beautifully. Partnerships with the ICC and standards, developing their own database, and others are collecting data now. And we've really seen an uptick in the capability of the manufacturers themselves to deliver on not only high-end hospitality projects, but for this call, you know, multifamily housing projects that are very sophisticated. And we're now seeing competing head-to-head with traditional construction. It's a very exciting time.
Yeah, well, thank you, Ryan. Tom, we're gonna come back to you to wrap up the entire impact. I think it's a good way to work, but I'm gonna move to Donna. Again, the most recent report, but also part of Dodge's continual effort to, you know, to gather data on the construction industry and keep us informed. So maybe talking a little bit again, you know, 2017 sort of virgin territory, although a number of us were involved, and you know, 4 years later, you know, there's a lot of interest, there's a lot of knowledge again, but there's obviously new things to discuss. How did Dodge approach this new report? How did they position it within this growing body of literature? What were some of the goals that you wanted to address, and again, the content itself?
Sure. So we had actually done a study on prefabrication and modular construction back in 2011. Mm-hmm. And our initial thought was, you know, as we tracked trends in the construction industry in North America, there were a lot of trends that all kind of led into offsite construction being really important. Looking at productivity issues in the industry was a big driver. It's something that we kept coming back to over and over again in some of our studies. In addition to that, we did a lot of work on lean for several years, and obviously offsite can be a huge lean strategy if done well. So, and then in addition to that, you know, we've always been tracking BIM for a while, and we found a pretty deep connection between the way that BIM can help enable some of these approaches. And then finally, we've always been tracking sustainability since I joined the group back in 2010. Sustainability has always been a core element that we looked at. So all of these big trends that we've focused on independently do seem to come together here. And, you know, truthfully, since about 2018, we were trying to get enough interest. The model that Dodge works on for the Smart Market Report series is that we work with industry partners to help us fund the research and the publication. So, you know, we started trying to find some really good interested partners to help us get this research going. And Bradley came to us because they were hearing about how this could be a huge transformative element in the industry. They wanted to understand it better, and they wanted to be at the forefront of that understanding. So they were our founding partner. MBI came in almost immediately thereafter. You know, we told them, look, we're interested in doing this. And then Tom became an invaluable resource in helping us put everything together. And certainly when we were trying to come up with the questionnaire, we definitely relied on the body of research that's out there to understand it better, to understand what to ask about. That was also very, very critical. So, so that was basically the context. Do you want me to keep going, or are we going to do that?
Yeah, no, you can, I mean, yes, please. And in general, what would you say is, and what would you say is the, you know, in fairly sort of an overview, what would you say is the sort of the content in terms of the way the report is structured, or
Sure.
key findings?
Sure. So it's kind of important to understand what the report is and what the report isn't too.
Right.
I do find there's sometimes a little bit of confusion out there. We did do all of our studies, all of our smart market reports are based on market research in the industry. So we did online surveys of architects and contractors, to understand both general contractors and trade contractors, to really understand their perspective. And in this particular case, we didn't just draw on Dodge's resources, which we relied on quite a bit for the architect and the GC and trade side, but we also worked with our partners. MCAA came on as a partner, and they also distributed the survey to their members, as did MBI distributed the survey to theirs, and we had 4 industry partners as well: ABC, AISC, NECA, and TAUC. And those were all really critical to bring people in, but they were also groups that were very, very engaged already in this issue. So what we did find is that we thought that the best value would not be an adoption study. So this is not an adoption study because the pool of people who participated in it was a little bit too selected. Instead, we were looking for people who had experience and expertise. And what we did is when we sent out the survey, one of the first questions people were hit with was, do you have experience in either prefabrication or modular construction with the course of definition provided? And how they answered depend on what kind of questions they saw from there, because we knew that modular did not have anywhere close to the market share that prefabrication did, just from the other industry resources that are out there. So anyone who said they had some good experience in modular were immediately sent to the modular group. And what that landed up with is the 600 respondents that we had, about 1/3 landed up going down the modular path and about 2/3 down the prefab path. Mm-hmm. And so that it's just important to understand that we're only talking to, and when we show utilization figures, we're only talking to people who are already using these methods. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We did get into 4 different areas. We got into use questions, exactly what they were doing, and there's a lot of detail on that. I'm not going to go into any kind of on that. We got into performance questions, which had very exciting results. We got into questions on BIM. That's part of what drove us into this in the first place, and we really wanted to understand the use of BIM and its impact in these areas in general. And then we did look a little bit at drivers and obstacles like the rest of the team did. And I'm going to be curious to see how, where I'd forgotten where their findings aligned on those. So, and for modular, I'm not going to go into all the prefab findings. There's way too much here. But for modular construction, we did find that those who are using it were expecting to really increase their intensity of use of panelized modular and of 3D volumetric modular. We saw significant commitment to that. We saw the expected project types, right, that we're going to be focused on in the next 3 years: hotels and motels, multifamily, healthcare, and college buildings. But hotels and motels in particular were growing substantially in terms of the percentage who thought they'd be using offsite construction to build those, as compared to those who said they have already used offsite construction to build in the last 3 years. Those who are expecting to use it in the next 3 years, in hotels and motels in particular, were really committed. We also saw a lot of growth in multifamily. We also saw that number increase significantly. We also saw a healthy percentage who said they were going to use it for K through 12 schools and low-rise office buildings as well. So sort of an interesting expansion of what people commonly associate with these types. I'll be interested to see, one thing that I'd like to, ask the panel about later is, we had these great findings about hotels and motels, but now who knows what kind of hotel and motel market we're going to emerge into. Yeah. So I don't know what that means, but I do think the multifamily piece is likely to remain very strong, even though, it's going to be impacted, obviously, if there's a huge recession. There's so many things that we contribute in terms of these building methods to dealing with recessionary pressures that I think that will hold solid, but I have no idea if there's going to be a hotel and motel market for 3-4 years from now. So we did find very, very high levels of BIM use. In terms of using BIM at all. At least not, almost every used BIM on at least some of their modular projects, but they weren't using it on all of them. It was not at all consistent. Although we see a lot of growth in those who were using it half or more. But but the one thing that did create the opportunity for is we were able to compare the benefits of those who were using BIM on the majority of their projects to those who weren't. And we did find that they had both better schedule performance and better budget performance if they were using BIM. So BIM use correlated to really some of the key benefits of modular. And that's the other key part of the report. We did find that general contractors in particular were the big beneficiaries of schedule and budget improvements that they, the prime contractors, this includes construction managers and design builders, but they were the ones who really saw incredible benefits in terms of schedule performance and in terms of budget performance on their project. Architects and trade contractors did see pretty good budget performance, less schedule performance, but the contractors were off the charts in terms of what they reported. And we asked about a series of 7 different benefits that modular might provide, and nearly everyone, I mean 80% and above, experienced all 7 benefits.
Wow.
I've been doing these studies for a long time. Lean people are very enthusiastic about lean and find a lot of great things, but I have never seen findings like these. They were just amazing. That the majority really were reporting that they were seeing improved quality, that they were seeing improved productivity, improved safety. I'm just off the charts. So that was a really exciting finding. And then, when we look at the drivers and obstacles, the drivers were the benefits. Quality, schedule, and budget performance were the key drivers. But the obstacles were a little bit more interesting because we found that the drivers were very similar actually to prefab, but the obstacles for modular were very unique to modular. And the key one is that it was lack of owner interest from our group. That they really needed the owners to be engaged. And you have to understand, we did ask about we don't think it's applicable to our project, which is typically what a lot of people pick. That came in 3rd. So owner interest was really important. Lack of availability of modular manufacturers. This was a US-based study. So I think, when I listened to what Jan said about, what people said about how before everybody was kind of like, and now they're like, oh, we had to get into it because these people are eating our lunch. I think we're in the beginning of that transition here in the US, but that's what signs seem to point to. So, and with that, let me hand it, I want to hand it over to Tom a little bit. To talk about the,
let me just,
the impact.
And I'm going to come, I was going to say the same, I have the same idea, which is, and maybe even to bring the whole conversation together, Tom. So, I mean, we've been involved in looking at this industry. You've been involved in representing it for a while, both through MBI, which represents commercial, as well as MHBA, which represents the residential side. And we really, we all hope, I think the folks on the call, the researchers, let's say, hope these are tools, right? And I also think that's part of the conversation today. Asking you, Tom, in terms of impact, how do you see these as, the findings of these, but also the concepts, the terminology, how do you see these as tools for moving the industry forward? How do we use these tools? How do manufacturers, builders, other folks in the construction industry use these as tools? Again, as somebody who's really in a sweet spot right between the research and the implementation of these reports.
Yeah, well, let's jump back to the MBI 5 and 5 report. We were very excited to work with both you and Ryan. In fact, our board basically adopted this research as our strategic plan. So everything we've done for the past 5 years has been tailored to this specific report. We focused much more heavily on obtaining better data for everyone wants, what's the industry size, markets, so forth. Partners, we've done an incredible amount of outreach with, Ryan mentioned ICC, so many partners we're working with now, AGC, standards. We are currently working on 3 industry standards for volumetric modular construction, 2 with ICC and 1 with CSA in Canada. Simultaneous, 3 standards being developed now. And then the big one that you guys talk about is the 3 C's for for our own industry: competency, capacity, and capability. And that one is really an ongoing. It's a moving target, but all of this. What's exciting to me is all of this ties into what the Dodge findings, also reported, in that this will lead to improved productivity. Donna, we were very excited to see the results of this report. 93% stated improved productivity, quality, schedule certainty. So we were floored with how many saw that level of improvement. We knew they'd see improvement, but 93% was pretty overwhelming. So MBI has wanted to be involved in partnering and funding and supporting this research with the goal of greater adoption across the board. That improved productivity absolutely ties in with what McKinsey's been talking about for the past 3 or 4 years. The construction industry has to move down this path. So we're thinking all 4 of these reports certainly individually are leading there, but when you do something like this, a webinar like this, and you point them all out, I think it just multiplies the impact.
Dennis, I want to pass the torch to you so that we can get, we love to talk about these topics, and this is kind of a dream to be on the same call with all the folks that, again, I kind of respect highly in the work that we've all done. Yeah, maybe it would be good to shift into the broader community and see what burning questions there are and topics again in the ether.
Yeah, no, I think it's been great so far. And yes, we've collected a variety of questions throughout the last few days from our community as they are registering for this event. And there's a few that have popped up in the chat box as well. So I'll get started on the list we received through email prior to the event. And then if anyone has any additional questions they'd like to ask, please post those to the chat box. So first, let's talk a little bit about barriers for adoption specific to residential construction. I think that's one of the things that our audience is going to be most interested in. And it doesn't have to be focused specifically to volumetric, but I think this could be an off-site discussion. So recently, as kind of an extension of the tools that are being described here today, we've created the off-site heat map, which has about 900 data points of pod, mod, and panelizers scattered throughout the United States and some across North America that are accessible to production builders, the solutions they provide and where they're located. So this is a resource that has gained a lot of interest in our community. So with that, I'd just like to ask the panelists, what do you see as the biggest barriers to rapid adoption of offsite for residential construction?
Well, Dennis, do you want me to jump in on that one?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, one of the challenges we see within the modular industry is, we talk about having a national building code, the International Building Code or the International Residential Code, but we don't. We have 50 state versions of it, and really beyond that, we have local amendments and adoptions and deletions to that code. So we have really a myriad of building codes across the U.S. 2012, 15, 2018. And if you're a modular manufacturer building in multiple states, that's one of the challenges. You have to meet the code where that home or building is being located. So you have to know the codes in 4, 5, 6, 10 different states, or even further, the localities to where that's going. Not a huge barrier. Our manufacturers do that all the time, but nonetheless, it goes back to what you guys discovered, this lack of standards in the industry. We don't have a national building code. We have a model code that is adopted by every jurisdiction. So that's one I'll throw out there, and I'll allow the others to chime in.
I wanted to add another a subtitle of the 2019 module report, but also comes up in all the reports, which is the terms product and process. I think it's actually the concept is a barrier, particularly for the residential side, between thinking of mods and panels as if they were prefabricated building products. They're not. They're the components of a complete building. And so I think literally the contracting process, the design process, it's a tricky thing with modular to claim that you can do anything according to, modular can construct anything, but the process to gain those benefits that Donna was alluding to, that Jan suggests that everyone believed that you could deliver, that does require a slight shift in a way that a new technology does not. in a way that a new product does not, in a way that a new product process does. And I think that's, that's something that's visible even in the heat map that I think the Housing Innovation Alliance has started to do, which is, again, some of these are actually products. That's why Donna made such a nice distinction between prefabricated and modular, right? Prefabricated products, HVAC systems, but even windows, those are things you can adapt and you can bring into an existing workflow. Modular, whether it's panelized or volumetric, it can deliver in all these processes. It's part of a process, but it's also a slightly different process. And that's something, again, it shows up a lot in both the McKinsey reports. And it does require, it's a two-way process. And I think, again, the modular industry in a genuine way has promised to be able to deliver without asking for a little bit of a change in the way we do quote unquote business. Right. And I think to a detriment a little bit. Whereas in fact, again, what we've seen across the board in other countries is that things like vertical integration, things like thinking sustainably, things like automation, things like thinking like an industry, things like thinking about also customer experience in a way that a car dealer does are not, they're not optional if you want to see these benefits. They're not additional benefits. They are a prerequisite. And I think from what we've seen and what actually all 4 reports should be able to tell the residential builder is that all of the things, all the benefits you're seeing in a way from this new technology, from this new product also require a slightly different process. And that's something that I think it's something that there's a bit of a translation in the discourse that needs to change. Otherwise, sure, we will not see those benefits.
Can I add one more thing, Ivan? Sure. We've talked about all the construction process in the industry in the U.S. Everything about construction in the U.S., everything from the financing, the procurement, the building codes, the insurance, everything was written for a site-built world. Everything. Mm-hmm. All of that has to change. And we're working on that. We're working with AGC on a consensus contract from the legal side. We worked with AIA on a design guide for architects. So we realize that there's a massive amount of education that needs to occur, and the construction industry historically has not embraced change to the level we would like to see it. So it's an ongoing process.
And I do think thinking about the owners. It's kind of goes right to what Ivan was saying, because it's really the owners that can change process. They have the power of the contract, which is such a big influence on process. It's not only factor in process, but it's a huge influencer. And if a well-informed owner can really change process. So I don't know how that translates though into the residential world, other than multifamily residential, because we didn't get into that area as much in our study. But still, I think that goes to the heart of what Ivan was getting at. Mm-hmm.
I might comment a little bit about residential, because I think, a lot of the audience is interested in that. We've tried to help over time folks in the structural building components market, heat map from this group, upscale and upskill to do more value added. So panelized or other products for the home building or the multifamily markets. And we just asked the question Dennis asked was about barriers, right? Mm-hmm. And one of the big barriers we have found, and it goes to Donna's point, is the influence, especially in the residential market, of subtrades and big subtrades like big site framers, MEP subcontractors that can really derail the utilization and adoption of offsite construction, because there's all these questions about process and scope. And if that owner isn't really strong in saying, this is the way the contract's gonna work, then those subtrades are the tail wagging the dog in many ways. And they won't change their pricing, they won't adopt their process. And so, and they see it as a risk. And until they see the panel or the module being manufactured and they see, oh, this is a completely different scope, I need to reprice my bid here, it's going to be very difficult, right? So it does require, I think, that owner or developer or home builder taking the charge and educating the process and leading that through in a contractual way.
Jan, did you have something?
Yeah, I just wanted to maybe add the perspective of some of the really large real estate investors. So that would be also, again, of course, then multifamily or also mixed developments, offices and so on, where I've spoken to dozens of those types who put a few billion per year into the ground. every single one of them is by now very open to and very interested in modular. So it does come through. It's no longer hidden anywhere. They're mostly kind of trying to employ people to look into it and carefully taking their first steps. But at the end of the day, it's a little bit of a catch-22. So what it all comes down to is that they say, so here's my site, here's the 3 billion that I'm going to spend. Here's my big contractor who tells me, okay, for those 3 billion, you're going to get X. And now I'm going around and finding that modular supplier who tells me you're going to get the same for 10% less than 3 billion. And I can't find him. Well, guess what? There's no modular player on this planet who can deliver a 3 billion project, not a single one.
Yeah.
And that's the catch-22. And even if there is one, or there were one, they wouldn't have the 10% cost savings yet usually, because, well, currently they're not at that scale and that level of professionalism. So it's really something that needs to jumpstart this industry. Some of the big investors are kind of interested in doing that, but it's also very slow moving, because then they do need to take a multi-project, decade-long view to make it work out and really kind of invest in partners that they build up over time, which makes me also think for the modular industry itself, to what extent there is not also an opportunity for just at scale risk-taking, just jumping that scale hurdle, jumping that industrial learning curve hurdle to become what is required from large investors by means of putting down money.
That's basically Katerra's business model in a way.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Why wouldn't there be 10 Katerras on this planet? Yeah. Why is there space only for one? There's also Uber and Lyft and a few others. Yeah. In a much smaller market and a much simpler market.
So I think if we can, let's build off that a little bit from another question we received. So outside of healthcare related work, how do you see the impact of COVID-19 influencing offsite construction? Will it accelerate, deter, no change? Kind of like to get your thoughts on that one.
I got a quick take on that, Dennis, if I could. Sure. I think one of the things we're already seeing is that some of the conversations that were happening prior to COVID relative to affordable housing, relative to the need for improved educational space, those conversations were tending to drag on and getting kicked down the road a little bit. We're starting to see a more, an appetite from some of these policymakers to say, we have to address our housing problems. And given the labor shortages, we have to go modular or we have to industrialize. So City of Toronto, for example, they've been delaying their housing issues for so long. They recently announced they're going to build 250 modular housing units. And they did that during this crisis. They made that decision during this crisis because they know these larger social problems that existed pre-COVID all were just highlighted by this crisis. Homelessness, just affordable housing in general, education, all these infrastructure needs are still there. They were all just, someone just shone a big light on it and said, these are problems. We have to address them. So I see it as accelerating the growth and the conversations. I'd be interested to hear what others think.
I actually think that we're still trying to figure this out, right, as an industry, but there are going to be real challenges with social distancing on site. I mean, on-site work is chaotic and complicated. And, while I'm not saying it's easy to social distance in a manufacturing facility, it is easier. Much easier to control. So I think that is, I don't know if that's going to play out the way it should, but I think that has the potential to be a huge driver towards this approach.
But in general, also what we've noticed is in the mature modular markets, the relationship towards construction labor in general becomes much more serious. It's it's salaried, it's not seasonal. So the kinds of relationships between employers and workers are different. Again, health benefits are a bigger part of the industry. Safety is not just a requirement; it's a kind of logical step. And so I think in that sense too, I think the perception of the industry as a manufacturing industry, as a place of safety standards, as a place will also, again, will ensure that there's some kind of retention of labor, because we've seen that in other industrialized industries. So we were seeing that with agriculture and with meat processing, where those industries are industrialized, they're not very safe. They're not very, they don't acknowledge workers' benefits. On the other hand, again, we've seen this doesn't necessarily always come with offsite construction, but it often does, that a smaller, higher trained group. We've seen that with companies like Factory OS in San Francisco, and newer kind of modular play. We've seen that with Katera, where, again, the kind of job security, job quality in general that we associate with high pay, with desirable blue collar jobs, we're seeing that growing. And actually that part of the story, I think, for both for owners of manufacturing, but also for the industry at large, as a kind of public speed, quality, but also the quality of jobs that this industry can create will change the perception of construction at a time where I think it needs it, because we're not going to have seasonal jobs. The fluidity of labor that, especially in the U.S., has made both things like agriculture and construction cheap. That's certainly not coming back. That's certainly something that's changed. So I think there's a lot of moving parts, but it seems like many of them move in a direction that certainly requires a certainly more thought out, more rationalized approach, which offsite tends to prefer.
All right, I just want to build off that a little bit, and I think, Jan, this one will be for you. So how would one suggest addressing the paradox of when business is good and we're too busy to adapt and change, versus business is bad and we can't invest in change as funds are restricted? So kind of how do we take advantage of this opportunity as it presents itself to further validate these solutions in the market?
Yeah, well, we advise our clients to invest in good and in bad times and what is out next, because otherwise you end up being left behind. I mean, the good news for some, I shall say, is that while so many, of course, are struggling with the crisis as it is unfolding and looking at their balance sheet and so on, most of the clients we talk to are now having as top priority investments into innovation, business model changes, consolidation, and kind of forward-looking strategies. So they're really trying to take advantage of the crisis to move ahead. Now, these clients that we talk to are typically the leading companies in kind of each industry, including in construction. So the picture might be dramatically different for the long tail of SMEs that characterizes construction. And that makes me also actually, while I agree with everything that's been said in terms of the momentum now for change, we can definitely see that. There is a downside risk that, particularly in the US, where unemployment rates are skyrocketing, that may have an impact on wages and lead to a situation where it's actually no longer economical to economize on unproductive labor. You can just throw more people at the site and let them go figure. It's cheap. I hope that's not going to happen, but it's not completely implausible, I'm afraid.
Okay. Interesting. All right. If anybody has anything else they'd like to add to that point, happy to hear it. Otherwise, I'm going to pivot over to starting to get some questions from our audience here on the call. Oh, we're good.
Just have one point to make to reinforce what Jan said. In the last recession, when that was picking up in 2008, we saw a lot of offsite manufacturers go out of business. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that can be attributed to, and the answers to that when we ask the question are exactly what Jan said, which is we can throw more people at the problem where we need to employ people on the job sites. So we're going to move away from this. Or prices, in fact, dropped from those site builders, and therefore it didn't demand that as much. But I think we should remember that coming out of COVID-19, and as the economy does start to recover, and it will recover, we're still going to have the labor problem we have today, or just had just before. We're still going to have it. And so we're going to be in just as bad situation. And why do we have to continue to go through these highs and lows constantly as an industry, as opposed to trying to find a better solution to stave these bad times out? It'll just be my perspective.
Amen.
Because I think we are.
And I have been hearing things from contractors that this is more anecdotal, but that a lot of them are paying their workers right now because they don't think they can afford to lose them, even if they don't have the work. So
they
this,
don't think they're going to come back. Yeah.
it's expecting a huge glut of skilled workers. Now, unskilled is a different situation, but the skilled workers on the site, I have seen no indication from the quarterly contractor studies we do for the commercial construction index for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. I have no indication that contractors are expecting a huge glut of possible. Some of them think they might be able to poach a little bit, but generally most of them think it's worth continuing to pay people just to keep them.
Interesting. So let's switch gears a little bit and talk a bit about the financing issues related to off-site versus on-site construction. So one of the questions we have from the community is they're wondering about the financing issue for modular versus off-site. And can you discuss in a little bit more detail about how these obstacles are being overcome?
Yeah, I'm going to hit on that one, and then again, I'll defer to the other panelists. This is Tom with MBI. The financing of a modular project, Donna's report talked about improved cost certainty. That's true, but the financing profile for a modular project can look a little different than a conventional project. And that's because more funds are needed on the front end as the manufacturer procures all the materials and starts the project in the factory. So there's a little higher need on the front end, but often a shorter overall financing model. And sometimes lenders, again, they like doing things the way they've always done them. And when you say we need a little more upfront, but it's going to be less risk on the back end and more cost certainty, you have to educate them on that process. They don't want to take a chance and end up losing money. One of the things MBI is doing, we worked with Fannie Mae, and they are about to put out a lender's guide for modular projects. It was supposed to go out in April, but COVID delayed it a little bit. So that should be going out to the entire Fannie Mae lending community this month, spelling out all these details. That'll be a huge help just to put it in front of lenders. Hey, modular projects, they're perfectly acceptable to finance. Here's what you need to know about them. So that's one of the things MBI is working on.
Okay, and just before we get anyone else to help answer that question, I want to just make a quick note. We were originally going to wrap up around 3 o'clock unless we had strong attendance and a good Q&A session rolling. We're going strong. Just about everybody's still with us, so we're going to extend it another 15 minutes or so if that's okay with everyone on the call. And so we have about time to finish this question, a few more, and then we'll wrap up. Thanks, Tom.
Thanks.
Yep. Anyone else? Ivan, any thoughts on specific to the financing?
I think the difference, again, I think we're getting terminology right, which is exciting. We're getting there. But when you say modular versus what I think the person that was offsite, modular is offsite, but I think what they're meaning is a prefabricated building product, which is more of an open system, is that, again, financing both in terms of the modular manufacturer, but also you're going to see that engineering and design services are going to change. It's what we talked about with the cost of everything moves up front. But then that is just something that requires it does require a different business model. So in addition to educating the sort of the banking sector in the US, it's also worth understanding, again, back to the story that those returns that modular promises, modular construction, which again includes panelized, includes volumetric, it requires, again, early planning, early decisions. And that is why the financing is different. It's not just because modular is more expensive, or because it's because you are making decisions. You're not able to speculate on the cost of materials. You're not able to change. There are things that you're not able to change. The McKinsey report the second McKinsey report does a very good job of actually very clearly defining that. And I think everyone is taking this on. I personally found those, because I didn't make them, I personally found those diagrams to be very clear. It really explains, again, why the financing works that way. So it's important to understand it's not just because it's a more expensive product. I think that's been the confusion, or a more complicated product. But it is one where decisions are made at a significantly different time of the process. And that's what's great to hear that Tom's having a dialogue and explaining that. And that's important to understand, as opposed to saying it's more expensive or less expensive. It's really, again, it's about that sequence.
I might add to that, we are seeing, I think there's 2 or 3 companies, Tom can probably confirm, that are being engaged with the Modular Building Institute and other groups that are offering financing products for offsite construction projects because they do require early draws and capital up front. So, you know, supply and demand, capitalist society, people are going to fill that gap and that niche that's emerging in the industry.
Yeah, Ryan, you're right. We, on our sister organization, the Modular Home Builders Association, we have several lenders that have found that niche. They like it. They like the manufacturers they work with. They like the builders they work with. And you know, we obviously would like to see more lenders in this space, but when we find a good one that understands modular construction, they get very busy.
Good, great. Thanks, guys. Okay, Jan, this one's specific to you. Jan, in the 2017 report, you talk about 4 disruptions to increase productivity, while transparent markets reduce the competitive nature of construction bidding.
I'm not sure I fully understood the question behind. So what's the...
Well, more transparent markets reduce the competitive nature of construction bidding.
I'm not sure. Huh? I think usually the more transparent a market is, the more competitive it gets.
More competitive, right?
Yeah.
The fact that currently, of course, owners play around with tricks to give the price of competitors, but of course a wrong one to other tenders so that they underbid each other, doesn't make it very competitive. It just makes it a very bad, unprofessional process.
And it may be one of the reasons why construction is so low productivity in the first place, by the way. Just that, I think that's one of the most exciting findings I found in the 2017 report, because I remember as a conventional architect being really frustrated by this game that people play that really raised the price of construction for the rest of us. Anyway, just to add my 2 cents as a frustrated architect.
Okay. Good. All right. So we talked a little bit about SMEs already. So let me get into the next one here. For residential housing, we continue to read of higher offsite adoption rates in Europe. How much of that delta compared to the US is because those markets, excuse me, because those markets don't expect the same level of tuning and customization?
I can answer that. So, well, we see that in Japan and places like Sweden, we have a higher adoption rate. And again, to be specific, in Sweden, for example, it's panelized construction. So we see which is a form of, again, especially to the way McKinsey defines it, and we like that term too. Again, it's a highly prefabricated, highly pre-designed systems. So you have as much as 80% market share, which is really impressive. In the and this is in the area that I think many of the audience are interested in. 80% of the single family market is dominated by highly pre-designed offsite construction, closed cell panelized construction. We see that in Northern Europe, in places like Ireland as well. We see that to some degree also in places like Japan. And for lack of a better word, it is a myth and a misconception that those systems are not customizable. As an architect, I think they're more customizable. Now, what we consider as customization might be different, and there are always cultural differences. There are cultural differences within the regions of the US. But I do think I've heard that a lot. I think Ryan has heard this a lot. We've traveled a lot. We've seen it. We've talked to customers. I mean, particularly in Japan, even more so than even the Scandinavian countries, simply because they have a more experience with the customer side. They're much more customizable than what clients are allowed to do in anything other than a architect designed, super high-end house. And so I'm just not sure even where that information, it seems very anecdotal to me as a researcher. On the other hand, what we have found is that companies that are able to first solve their organizational question to really work like an industry, then to invest in automation, then are able to really focus finally on true customization, on true customer input, and on what really matters to consumers. Because guess what? They've got the business model where they can afford to do that. They've got the business model where they can make enough profits to do the research, but also to really find out what a customer wants to and how they want to impact their home. So we've heard this a lot. As a researcher, more as an architect, I do not feel that consumers in this country have a lot of choice in the single family market. I think they're given what is relatively few options in a very similar construction system. But in Japan, you can choose between steel, concrete, and wood within the same price point. You can't do that in the US, for example. So I think that's it's certainly not, the research doesn't support it. And I do think, on the other hand, the kind of standardization standardization is a conversation we just had with the Swedish colleague. Standardization is not the same as cookie cutter repeatability. Standardization is the development of a system within which people can make real choices that are economical, real choices that are cultural.
Yeah, just creating some simple parameters, right?
It's like gamification. Yeah. I mean, that is making yourself, so it's about feeling, right? Retail is about feeling. And so how do we make a consumer feel heard? That's something we Swedish consumers are very happy with. So we're looking at it from the outside, not looking at consumer experience. We're looking at it with a very biased eye.
Okay, great.
Maybe I could just add to that. If we're talking, it depends on what we're talking about. I think implicitly in what Ivan's suggesting is something that is a solution to housing more people. If we're talking about quote unquote luxury homes that have all sorts of valleys and hips and gables, a massive roof on a light wood frame house, single family house, that is sort of the McMansion version of McMansion ideal in America still. Probably won't be after this recession, but nonetheless, if that's what we're talking about as far as the home building industry and offsite, then yes, I would say the taste or the customer preference in other countries is going to be much more straightforward than what we see in America. And can we use modular construction to serve that market? It's probably not very optimal. I'll be perfectly honest and frank. And so that would be the difference. But for the wide majority of housing more people, certainly offsite construction makes a lot of sense.
Great. Well, with that, I think we're just about out of time today. I really appreciate everyone's contributions to this conversation. If anyone has any final words they'd like to share with our community, we'd be happy to hear them now. And then otherwise, I'll wrap up with a few closing slides.
Dennis, I'm going to give a little plug out here. This is Tom at MBI again. We have all these reports and other white papers available at modular.org under our resources section, free downloads.
Okay, great. Thanks, Tom. All right. Well, I think that's it from everyone then. Thanks again, everybody. Really appreciate your contributions to this conversation. I'm sure we'll be continuing this dialogue throughout the course of the year, as this is an important topic for our entire community. Just want to have a quick wrap up here. Any questions we didn't get to, we will log. We'll share with each of the panelists, and then we'll make sure to circulate that back with the community through a report out. We also have a few other events you might be interested to attend following up this discussion. So this is the first of our Coffee Talk series. It's going to be held the second and fourth Tuesday of every month. So coming up later this month, we have a marketing and sales coffee talk focused on engaging customers at a distance. So you can register for that online or through our website. And then we also have the next two laid out already for June. We have business predictions for the next 18 months with our chairman, George Casey. He gave us a little taste of what he sees coming for the U.S. home building industry at our staycation event on April 22nd. He's going to embellish on that a bit and bring in a few of his peers to share their version of the story. And then on June 23rd, we're going to get together with the team at Rise. And Rise is an organization based out of Canada looking at high-performance building products and technologies and helping to educate consumers so they can make better decisions or more informed decisions as they look to improve their home or buy new homes. So we're going to be launching a new report with them and introduce that report during that 23rd Coffee Talk. And complementing all of these conversations, we have a new podcast series which we launched just a few weeks back, actually. So I had the pleasure of Ryan and Ivan joined me for the first one on offsite construction. You can access that through our website as well. And there's a few others that we're going to be talking about. Specifically, we launched one with Jeff Hoppenbeck of Simple Homes, who is an offsite producer working with a production builder out of Denver. So that's a great story to catch up on as well.
And a good way to see how Sweden translates into the US, by the way, just as a plug there.
There you go. Exactly. Yeah. Perfect example. So with that, if you like what you saw and you want to dig deeper into our community, then visit our website or feel free to drop me an email. It's dennis@housinginnovation.org. and we can walk you through the different decision-making tools and resources we've created, such as the offsite heat map and the other tools that we'll be launching through the rest of the year. So thanks everyone for your time. Have a great rest of the afternoon.
Thank you, Dennis.
Everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.